Imagine a train journey from London to Birmingham that takes just 45 minutes. A sleek, modern railway cutting travel times in half, connecting cities, creating jobs, and transforming the way an entire nation moves. This was the promise of HS2 High Speed 2, Britain's most ambitious infrastructure project in a generation. But somewhere between that grand vision and today's reality, something went very differently than planned. HS2 was designed to be Britain's answer to the high-speed rail networks that have transformed travel across Europe and Asia. Countries like France, Spain, Japan, and China have built thousands of miles of high-speed track, their own versions of the bullet train, reshaping their economies and how their citizens live and work. Britain, the country that invented the passenger railway nearly 200 years ago, wanted to reclaim its place at the forefront of rail innovation. The original plan was bold, a Y-shaped network stretching from London through Birmingham, then splitting north to reach Manchester on one side and Leeds on the other. It would serve millions of passengers, ease pressure on existing rail lines like the West Coast Main Line, and help bridge the economic gap between the prosperous South and the industrial heartlands of the Midlands and the North. So what happened? Today, HS2 looks very different from that original vision. The northern branches have been cancelled. The line to Manchester, gone. The eastern leg to Leeds, scrapped years earlier. What remains is a single route, London Euston to Birmingham, roughly 140 miles of track. The grand Y-shaped network has become a single line, and then there's the cost. When HS2 was first proposed, the entire network was estimated at around £37 billion. Today, just the first phase, that single London to Birmingham route, is projected to cost somewhere between £49 and £57 billion. To put that in perspective, that works out to approximately £300 to £400 million per mile, making it one of the most expensive railway projects ever built anywhere in the world. How did Britain end up here? How did a project meant to unite the country become one of its most debated topics? The answers involve much more than just trains. This is a story about planning, priorities, environmental concerns, regional fairness, and the challenge of delivering major projects in a modern democracy. Whether you see HS2 as a necessary investment in Britain's future or a cautionary tale of ambition meeting reality, there's no denying its significance. The decisions made around this single railway line will shape conversations about infrastructure, spending, and national priorities for decades to come. In this video, we're going to explore the full story, the history, the arguments on all sides, what's actually being built, and what it means for Britain's future. No matter where you stand on HS2, understanding how we got here matters. Let's get into it. To understand where HS2 is today, we need to go back to where it all began. The idea first took shape in 2008, when planners identified a growing problem. The West Coast Main Line, Britain's busiest rail corridor, was running out of space. Anyone who's traveled on trains in the UK knows the experience: packed carriages, limited seats, and a network struggling to keep up with demand. Trains were full, capacity was stretched. Something had to change. By March 2010, the government officially announced HS2, a brand new high-speed railway that would connect London to Birmingham, and eventually branch out to Manchester and Leeds in that now famous Y-shaped design. The estimated price tag at the time, around £37 billion for the entire network. What's notable is that this wasn't a project belonging to just one side of the political spectrum. When a new government took office in May 2010, they reviewed the plans and decided to keep going. HS2 had genuine cross-party backing. It was seen as a way to rebalance the economy, to bring opportunity to regions outside London, and to deliver returns of £2 for every £1 invested. The legislative process moved forward. By 2017, the first phase received formal approval, and by 2021, the next section was authorized to. On paper, everything was progressing. But here's where the story gets complicated. The numbers started to change. That original estimate of around £16 billion for Phase 1, by 2013, the figure for the whole network had risen to £37 billion. Fast forward to 2024, and Phase 1 alone, just the London to Birmingham section, was projected at £49 to £57 billion. At over £300 million per mile, HS2 became significantly more expensive than similar projects elsewhere. For comparison, Spain built its Madrid to Galicia high-speed line for roughly £19 million per mile. Germany's Stuttgart to Munich route came in at around 70 million per mile. The economic debate intensified. Supporters pointed to the 30,000 jobs created and the thousands of businesses involved in construction. They highlighted future benefits. 500,000 jobs potentially linked to the project, tens of thousands of new homes near stations, and freed up capacity on existing lines for more local services. But others raised questions. Was high-speed rail between major cities really the best use of these funds? Could the same money have done more if spread across regional improvements, local transport links, and upgrades to existing networks? And then there's the environmental picture, which turned out to be far more complex than early promises suggested. HS2 was presented as a greener alternative to cars and domestic flights, but the construction itself comes with a significant footprint. Over 100 ancient woodlands faced disruption. Hundreds of wildlife sites sat within the project's path. Ponds, habitats, and protected species all came into the equation. The project committed to no net loss of biodiversity, but environmental groups questioned whether that promise could truly be kept. Even the carbon maths proved complicated. Building a railway of this scale requires enormous amounts of concrete, steel, and energy. Some estimates suggested it could take over a century of operation before the environmental balance sheet evened out. HS2 was meant to be simple, a fast train linking great cities, but nothing about it has been simple at all. Now, one of the most striking things about HS2 is how the reasoning behind it has shifted over the years. When the project was first announced, the headline benefit was speed, a 45-minute journey from London to Birmingham. That was the promise. Currently, if you take an Avanti West Coast service from London Euston, you're looking at around an hour and 20 minutes to Birmingham New Street on a Pendolino. HS2 promised to cut that nearly in half. But as questions emerged about whether shaving minutes off travel times was worth the investment, the messaging evolved. Suddenly, the focus moved to capacity, the idea that Britain's existing rail network was full and a new line was the only solution. Then came another shift. HS2 became tied to the goal of regional rebalancing, connecting the north to the south, spreading economic opportunity beyond London. The vision kept changing, and for many observers, that inconsistency made it harder to understand what HS2 was really for. And then the project itself started shrinking. In November 2021, the eastern branch to Leeds was removed from the plan. The line would now terminate at East Midlands Parkway instead. In June 2022, another connection, the Goulburn link north of Crewe, was cancelled. And then, in October 2023, came the biggest change of all. The entire Birmingham to Manchester section was scrapped. What had started as a 340-mile Y-shaped network was now a single 140-mile line from London to Birmingham. The announcement came at a major political conference, held, as it happened, in Manchester, the very city that had just lost its connection to the project. The reaction was immediate. Some called it a pragmatic decision, given rising costs. Others described it as short-sighted. The chair of the National Infrastructure Commission used the word New York. A £36 billion reinvestment plan was promised for northern transport projects, but early versions of that list drew scrutiny when some already completed schemes appeared on it. This brings us to a deeper issue, continuity, or rather, the lack of it. Since 2010, the Transport Secretary role has changed hands roughly every 2 years on average. HS2 has now spanned 5 different prime ministers. Each change in leadership brought new priorities, new reviews, and often new directions for the project. Scope changed, budgets were revised, and all the while, the timeline stretched further into the future, while the network shrank in size. In 2024, the incoming government confirmed it would not bring back the cancelled phases. However, it did commit to funding key elements like the Euston Tunnel works and announced an independent review of how HS2 has been managed. That review has already surfaced some uncomfortable findings. In early 2025, the project's new chief executive delivered a candid assessment. HS2 had, in his words, not succeeded in controlling costs or delivering on schedule. The project was estimated to be roughly 1/3 complete when the original plan had it at 3/4 done by this point. Construction had begun in some areas before designs were even finalized. There was no reliable system in place to measure progress against spending. External factors certainly played a role. The global pandemic disrupted supply chains and construction timelines. labor shortages emerged, material costs surged, particularly after international events sent energy and steel prices climbing. But according to the CEO's own assessment, the primary issues were internal planning, oversight, and execution. The Euston Station saga captures this complexity perfectly. After 8 years of work, the design for London's HS2 terminal at Euston has been repeatedly delayed and redesigned. Costs rose from an initial estimate of around £3 billion to nearly £6 billion. At one point, tunneling work was paused, then restarted, adding further delays. Official reports noted that even after all this time, there wasn't full clarity on what the final station would look like. Meanwhile, the human impact has been significant. Over 600 homes have been demolished along the route. More than 300 additional properties have been cut off from their surrounding neighborhoods. Tens of thousands of compulsory purchase orders have been issued. Compensation has been provided, market value plus 10%, along with moving costs. But for those affected, the disruption has been real and lasting. Around 250 acres of greenbelt land have been used for construction and infrastructure. And here's the tension at the heart of it all. HS2 was meant to benefit the regions, to close the gap between north and south. But now that the line only reaches Birmingham, some ask whether it will truly serve that goal, or whether the main beneficiaries will be those already well connected to London. Local communities along the route have raised concerns for years. At the same time, regional leaders, including mayors from across the political spectrum, have remained strongly supportive, calling HS2 essential to their economic plans. So why do supporters still believe in it? The core argument is capacity. The West Coast Main Line is one of the busiest railways in Europe, and upgrading it while keeping it running would be enormously disruptive and expensive. Anyone who's tried to book Avanti West Coast tickets during peak hours or experienced the Pendolino and Voyager services at full capacity knows the pressure this corridor faces. HS2, supporters say, will free up space not just for passengers, but for freight, potentially 144 extra freight trains per day, meaning millions fewer lorry journeys on British roads each year. There's also the long view. HS2 represents the first major north-south transport corridor built since the Victorian era. It's a publicly owned asset that will serve future generations. It's training thousands of engineers and construction workers in skills the country needs. And despite the complications, it remains part of Britain's plan to reach net zero emissions with zero-carbon high-speed trains, offering an alternative to cars and short-haul flights. For the West Midlands in particular, HS2 is seen as transformational. Investment decisions have already been made on the assumption that the railway is coming. Billions in private development are tied to its arrival. The question now isn't whether HS2 was a good idea in theory. It's whether what remains of it can still deliver on its promises. But what about those who believe the project simply isn't the right path forward? The most common argument is straightforward. The money could be better spent elsewhere. Rather than one flagship high-speed line, critics suggest that upgrading existing regional networks would benefit more people more quickly. East-west connections, linking cities like Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, and Hull, might do more to transform the north than a fast route down to London. Smaller, distributed projects across the country could spread the benefits far wider than a single corridor ever could. There's also the question of whether the assumptions behind HS2 still hold up. When the project was conceived, the expectation was that business travel would keep growing. Faster journeys meant more productivity, more meetings, more economic output. But then the world changed. Remote working went from a novelty to a norm. Video calls replaced many trips that once required a train ticket. Post-pandemic travel patterns haven't fully returned to what they were, and some analysts wonder if they ever will. If people are traveling less for work, and if the time spent on a train can now be used productively with a laptop and Wi-Fi, does shaving 30 minutes off a journey really justify tens of billions in spending? Then there's what economists call the sunk cost question. Billions have already been spent. Land has been purchased. Contracts have been signed. But does that mean the project must be completed at any price? Some argue that continuing down a path simply because you've already started isn't sound logic, especially when the costs keep rising and the scope keeps shrinking. And finally, there's the environmental tension. HS2 has been presented as a green project, electric trains, lower emissions, an alternative to cars and planes, but the construction itself has come at a cost to nature. Ancient woodlands, some hundreds of years old, have been affected. Wildlife habitats have been fragmented, and according to the project's own figures, the carbon emitted during construction may not be offset by operational savings for well over a century. For those who care deeply about the environment, this creates a genuine dilemma. Can something truly be called green if achieving it requires such significant ecological disruption? These questions aren't unique to Britain, and that leads to a broader conversation. Why do large infrastructure projects seem so difficult here? The numbers are striking. UK rail construction costs roughly twice the global average. Road projects in Britain see some of the highest cost overruns among comparable countries. Spain built an extensive high-speed rail network at a fraction of what HS2 costs per mile. France, Japan, and China have all delivered similar projects more quickly and more affordably. So what's different? Part of it is the planning system. Consenting times for major projects have increased significantly, up by around 65% since 2012. Legal challenges have become more common. The rate of judicial reviews on infrastructure decisions has risen sharply. Each delay adds cost. Each redesign adds complexity. There's also a cultural factor. British projects often incorporate extensive design refinements and environmental protections, sometimes described as gold plating. While well-intentioned, these additions drive up budgets. The famous example is a specialized structure built to protect bat habitats, a worthy goal, but one that added considerably to the bill. And perhaps most importantly, there's the question of political continuity. Megaprojects take decades, political cycles last years. When priorities shift with each new leader, long-term planning becomes almost impossible. Countries that deliver infrastructure well often have mechanisms that lock in commitments across political transitions. Britain, so far, hasn't found that formula. Interestingly, the closest comparison to HS2 isn't in Europe or Asia, it's in the United States. California's high-speed rail project has faced remarkably similar challenges: ballooning costs, shrinking scope, repeated delays. It's the only project in the world that approaches HS2's per-mile expense. Some observers suggest this points to a common difficulty in English-speaking democracies when it comes to delivering complex infrastructure. So where does HS2 stand today, in 2025? What remains is Phase 1, a 140-mile high-speed line from London Euston to Birmingham Curzon Street, with stations at Old Oak Common and Birmingham Interchange along the way. The route includes 32 miles of tunnels and 130 bridges. Trains will eventually run at up to 250 miles per hour, far faster than anything currently operating on the West Coast Main Line, including the tilting Pendolino services or the newer Hitachi trains, like the Class 800 Azuma and the upcoming Class 805 and Class 807 units that Avanti West Coast has on order. But challenges remain. Work on one key section has been deferred by 4 years. The design of Euston Station is still being finalized. Private funding is being sought to help complete the London terminal. And decisions about how frequently trains will run and where exactly they'll stop haven't been locked in. Some regional leaders are pushing for a scaled-down extension, a lighter connection that could link the Birmingham terminus to Crewe and eventually Manchester at lower cost. The idea is on the table, but there's no firm commitment yet. So what lessons should we take from all this? Perhaps that large infrastructure needs protection from short-term thinking, that cost estimates need to be more realistic from the start, that environmental assessments should happen earlier in the process, not as an afterthought, and that a fast train alone won't transform a region. It takes housing, skills, jobs, and local investment working together. HS2 set out to be a symbol of Britain's future. Instead, it's become a mirror reflecting some deeper questions about how the country plans, decides, and builds. Whether the finished railway delivers value, whether the money could have been spent better elsewhere, and whether Britain can learn to deliver major projects more effectively, these are questions that will take years to fully answer. But one thing is clear: whatever happens next, the story of HS2 will be studied for generations to come. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think HS2 is worth finishing, or should Britain have taken a different path? If you're interested in more content about trains in the UK high-speed rail and the future of British transport, Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Until then, safe travels.